From James Bond to Harry Potter, from Led Zeppelin to Guy Ritchie movies, and of course, Elizabeth Hurley, I think it's safe to say that I fancy quite a bit of British culture, and professional wrestling is no exception. But no matter how important it is to their neighbors across the pond, it's amazing how little Americans actually know about wrestling in the United Kingdom. That is, until right now, because today, Dave knows British pro wrestling. Wrestling has been popular in the United Kingdom since way before the United States was ever a nation. So it's very fair to say that the colonies were highly influenced by the wrestling from jolly old England. So to talk about that influence, let's travel back to England in the early 20th century. Now at this point, which was common, professional wrestling was used as part of a variety act. And on top of that, it gave circus strongmen something to do other than just, pose. Now the first big breakout star in English wrestling was Jack Carkeek, who was actually American, but his parents were from Cornwall, and that's exactly where he returned in order to make his name. And he did so by challenging the audience and daring to see if anybody could actually last 10 minutes with him. Now this kind of antagonistic nature gained a lot of notoriety for wrestling in England, so much so that it actually attracted wrestlers from all across the globe. And one of these wrestlers was the legendary Greco-Roman grappler George Hackenschmidt. And it's when Hackenschmidt arrived in England that he met Charles B. Cochran, a promoter who had the brilliant idea how to turn Hackenschmidt into a star. Hackenschmidt was booked against England's own Tom Cannon for the European Greco-Roman Heavyweight Championship. But there were two problems. First, Hackenschmidt had the personality of a gym sock, and Cochran actually got Tom Cannon to teach Hackenschmidt showmanship. That's right, his opponent was actually teaching him how to be a better performer. And the other problem was that Hackenschmidt was good. Real good. So good in fact that he was just too dominant and audiences got bored because there was no back and forth action. So that's when they decided to implement just a little bit of working. Hackenschmidt would ease off just a little bit, therefore making the match more competitive and also more exciting. That coupled with his newly found showmanship, and we have the very birth of sports entertainment as we know it today. Now don't get me wrong, there are a lot of factors that contribute to professional wrestling in the modern era, but make no bones about it because a lot of today's wrestling got its DNA passed down from wrestling in the UK. And now at this time wrestling was making huge developments. However, it all came to a crashing halt thanks to World War I. That's right, believe it or not, there are things more important in the world than wrestling. Now after the war, professional wrestling tried to gain some traction again, but it didn't do so until the beginning of the 1930s. And it was at this point that English wrestling actually looked to America to try and get its groove back. Because at this time stateside, gimmicks and fake wrestling were really popular, so England decided to borrow from America, even though America was actually borrowing that from England in the first place. But what was also popular in America was catch-as-catch style wrestling, which took over as the dominant and most popular form of wrestling, beating Greco-Roman. So England decided to make the transition as well. And it was easy to do because in Northern England, catch-as-catch style was the most popular form of amateur wrestling. So there was a good pool of talent to pick from when you decided to turn people pro. And professional is exactly what wrestling became again in England. Amateur wrestler Sir Ethel Oakley and grappler Henry Earslinger decided to form a company known as All In Wrestling. And All In Wrestling was supposed to be a brand new style of wrestling, and it was heavily promoted to be 100% legitimate, unlike all that fake stuff. Almost no one took that seriously. But for good or ill, it proved very popular. So popular in fact that they had a hard time keeping their roster up to book all the shows that were in demand. So because they didn't have enough quality wrestlers, they decided to fill out the roster with lesser talented individuals. But these individuals were given heavy gimmicks, also steel chairs and other kinds of weapons to cover up for their lack of technical ability. Now this created a lot of chaos in wrestling in the UK, so much so that the London County Council actually went ahead and banned professional wrestling. And this all happened right before another milestone, World War II. Now after the Second World War was over, professional wrestling tried yet again for another big comeback. However, this one was a lot harder to do. As England and the rest of Europe tried to recover, a lot of people just weren't interested in a fake sport after they saw some real world tragedy. That is, until Admiral Lord Montauvan stepped in. Montauvan was a huge fan of professional wrestling, and it really bothered him that people didn't take it seriously and that wrestling couldn't make a comeback. So Montauvan actually decided to form himself a committee consisting of wrestlers and a member of Parliament. So since everyone was complaining that professional wrestling was fake, one of the first things they decided to do was to create the Admiral Lord Montauvan set of rules. Now this was the first official rule set for professional wrestling in the United Kingdom. So now anytime that a promoter started getting flack about their sport not being legitimate, they would just point to the Admiral Lord Montauvan's rules and say, hey, we got official rules, buddy, that's how you know we're an official sport. Now the Montavans rules included all kinds of things from official weight classes as well as specific time limit rounds. Now even though we may not use all of these rules today, it doesn't mean that these rules didn't highly influence wrestling as we know it now, because it most certainly did. In England's pursuit to make sure that wrestling seemed legitimate, they did all kinds of things to make sure that professional wrestling seemed above board. So going forward from the Montavans rules, professional wrestling in England decided to focus heavily on clean technical wrestling. That's right, good old-fashioned pure technical wrestling, and the best part was, it worked. It got very popular in England, so popular in fact that there weren't a lot of gimmicks or even a lot of heels in wrestling. In fact, most wrestlers were actually faces. Because English fans at the time didn't need all the bells and whistles, they were perfectly content to focus on wrestling itself, and that's the kind of thing that would get you over. Man, England's great. But there was another development to come into play, and that happened in the 1950s when professional wrestling in the United Kingdom became televised. It was on TV that a wrestler would actually get to showcase their personality, and it was through TV that wrestlers became a household name. And it actually served as a great advertisement for wrestling, because it's when people decided to invite wrestling into their homes that they got really excited about it. So the next time wrestling was in town, they had to go out and see it. So TV was a huge boom for the business. Now as time moved on, heels and big gimmicks also decided to make a comeback as well, but they never lost focus on technical wrestling. And the next big breakthrough came from the Dynamite Kid, someone that everyone from Bret Hart to Chris Benoit said was highly influential and way ahead of his time. Now because punches and kicks really aren't a part of actual wrestling, well, professional wrestling in England also didn't focus on them that much either, and wrestlers like the Dynamite Kid decided to take that to the next level. So by the 70s, wrestlers like the Dynamite Kid really focused on transitioning from one hold into another and so on, and this continued all the way to the modern era, as Chain has moved on to the next evolutionary point, thanks to wrestlers like Jack Gallagher and of course, Zack Sabre Jr. So from your Lord Alfred Hayes to your Davey Boy Smiths to your Will Ospreays, thank you Great Britain for making wrestling so great. Well, I hope you liked this video, and if you did, go ahead and give me a thumbs up and subscribe if you haven't already. And don't forget to share this video with your friends. Thank you so much for watching Dave Knows Wrestling, and God save the Queen.